All right, hi everyone. Welcome to this week's webinar. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist, and this week we're going to be having some fun with files, or as much fun as you can have, I suppose. So we're going to look at some examples in Xojo primarily, so if you have questions, feel free to ask while I'm covering things, and I'll get to your questions when I can. But without further ado, let's dive right in. So let's see here. There are several ways you can access files with Xojo. Text files are very common, binary files as well, which can access any type of file, including text files. There's also more specific formats such as XML and JSON. And you can even use other things for storing files like a database, like a SQLite database. And Xojo also has something called VirtualVolumes that is pretty cool, and we'll take a look at the end. So to start with, we're going to take a look at some simple text file access using a text stream. Now, if you haven't used this before, it's pretty easy. The text stream is a class. I'll get the code right up here on your screen for you. And you can see here looking at this code, the text stream works on a file. And there's two types of text streams. There's an input stream and there's an output stream. Right here, we're looking at code that uses the input stream because it is going to take a file and display it in the text area. So if I run this, click the load button, and I get prompt here, we'll go to one of my sample files. And you can see it loaded the text to the file, and it put it right here in the text area. Now, how is it doing that? Well, it's simply doing it by declaring a text stream variable here in the method, and then it's calling the factory method on the text input stream to open the file. And you can see that right on this line right here. It's assigning the variable we created to the file we're trying to open. And I just let the user pick a file by using get open folder item. It doesn't really matter. I am also setting an encoding here. By default, UTF-8 is assumed, and it's probably the most common. But if you're dealing with files from places that are more unknown, you may need to specify a different encoding so that the file is processed properly. Unfortunately, there's not a great way to detect what an encoding of a text file is, so you may have to prompt the user, or if you actually know what the encoding is because of where it came from, you can specifically set it. The other thing you can want to make sure you do here is catch any file I/O exception errors that happen. So you can see right here, I have this wrapped in a try-catch block. And on reading, it's probably not as likely that you're going to get an I/O exception, but you do want to catch these things because you could get an exception raised in your application if a file system goes away. For example, if the user's attempting to access something on a remote file system or a network file system or something like that, and the connection's disrupted. So you can check for these I/O exceptions that will occur when the file is no longer able to be accessed, and you can gracefully exit rather than letting your app crash. Once you've gotten through all the busy work to get essentially a reference to your file, you can start chugging along with it. And down here at the bottom, we just verify that nothing is nil, and then you can just loop through the file until you get to the end of file. And in the case of a text input stream, you can read it line by line. You can also read the entire file at one time using the read all method. And this just copies it into another variable, and then we're outputting it or appending it to the text area one line at a time. You'll note here at the end on the close method, I have that's optional. You don't actually have to close the file specifically. It'll close automatically when the variable goes out of scope. And some people prefer that because calling close on the variable kind of leaves the thing in a state where you can't use it for anything anymore because it's closed, so it's not pointing to a valid file, so you can't do anything else with it. So some people prefer not to bother calling close and just let it handle automatically when it goes out of scope. But that's how you would write things out for text files. Very simple read things in for text files. And it's very simple, and it's very handy because a lot of things are text files in this day and age. Now, the converse of this is actually writing things out as text files. And you have pretty much the same type of commands that can be done, except you use the text output stream class. And rather than calling an open method, you call a create method. But the same general principle. You supply it a folder item of the file you want to create. And then there are a variety of methods that are available on here that you can call. Write, obviously, being the most common one. There's also write line, and you can do some flushing, but that's probably not going to be too necessary on file access anyway. But write and write line are the two. And write will write, as you might expect, will write the text without adding an end of line character to the end, and write line will add an end of line character to the end. And depending on your file format, you may or may not want that end of line character. So you can see in this example here, the you can load up files and you can save files by the same mechanism. Now, writing out simple plain text files is all well and good, but you can manipulate this a little bit. And one thing that people like to do is create tab delimited files, and you can easily do that. And I'll show you a little extension method here for a list box. Right now we have here a list box that has some data in it. And you may want to write this out to a text file, but have a tab between each cell and end of line between each row. Well, you can do that by using the same classes, the text output stream. And you can see that that's exactly what this does. The same sort of thing is creating the file. And but what it's doing is when it's writing it out, it's doing a little string manipulation here so that it's separating each cell in the list box with a tab character. And then writing a end of line character, or writing that whole line out, including the end of line character, for each row in the list box. And this is implemented as an extension method on the list box. So you can actually just call it as if it were a method on the list box. So you can call it like this, the list box name, and then .export, which is the method name, and provide it a folder item to output the information as. And then you can see when you run something like this, you get to pick a location. And then this writes out a file here that you can see, as I move the cursor, has tabs in it between the cell values. So you can start to create your own file formats in this manner, however you want. All right. Lewis is asking why on this code the tab character was redefined within the loop. And the main thing you can see here is that tab character isn't necessarily redefined. It's just assigned after the first value so that you don't get an initial tab to start at the beginning. So essentially the first time through the tab character is blank, and then after that it has a tab. So you don't get a tab character at the beginning of each line. All right, we're going to take a quick peek at a binary stream, but it is somewhat similar, except that there's only a single class rather than two. But otherwise, the overall concept is the same. So you can see you create a binary stream, you open it, the same as before. And then you can read it. And there's a variety of methods that are available on, let me just get the autocomplete here. There's a variety of methods available for reading in particular things that are in the binary file. And because with the binary stream, you can actually write specific binary data into the file. It doesn't have to be plain text. And this sort of thing was pretty commonly done, years ago. I'd say nowadays, text-based file formats are usually more common. But even Xojo has a binary file format for its projects, but also has two text-based formats as well. But you don't have to use binary stream to write specific binary data. You can actually use it to pull in text out of a file as well. And it can often be used in that manner if you have what is called a fixed format text file, which older systems and apps may have a fixed format text file where, a specific piece of data starts at character 32 and goes for 8 characters. You can use a binary stream to specifically move the position of the file to the appropriate character, read in the bytes you want, and then convert it over to a string or whatnot. So even though it has binary in the name, but if it's a fixed format text file, a binary stream can prove very helpful. So you can see the overall concept is still pretty much the same with this. And writing, again, works the same, except you call a create method on the same class rather than using a completely different class. I'm not going to go into binary stream in too much detail because otherwise it's effectively the same. Another use of binary stream that is handy, though, is for creating files. For example, if you're storing blobs in a database or something like that, you may want to pull the blob data out of the database and then create it as a specific file locally. And you can use a binary stream for that to, just pull the specific binary data out of your database and then use a binary stream to write that binary data to a file. And essentially you get an exact copy of that file created locally that you can then use. Great for pictures and other types of binary data. All right, let's talk a little bit about XML. XML is a very common file format, and it's also a bit wordy, and I'm sure you've all seen XML before. Let me open up a sample XML file here. Maybe. All right, this is, and you can see XML files always start with this little header at the top. And then they have these little indicators that indicate specific nodes. And essentially it's a giant nesting. So the way this would technically look is something like this, if I reformat it. So you can see the nesting here in this XML viewer that's showing the overall structure of the XML file. And it has what's called a root node at the top, and every XML file has to have a root node. And then you can start to put in whatever structure you want underneath that root node. And the root node name can be anything you want as well. And all of the names that are in these particular nodes can be anything you want. And you can have text that's within a specific node. You can start to assign attributes that are kind of within the node itself. And it can get even more complicated from there. But this is the overall structure. And we'll see how we can write code to create something like this. All right, in Xojo, there is a large set of classes here, starting with XML document. And kind of branching out there, but primarily the main ones you tend to use are XML document and XML node. But XML document is one of the main ones. You can see it has quite a few properties and methods. And so we'll start with that, and then we'll use that to create the XML file that we just looked at. So the first thing, like I mentioned when we were looking at the file, is every XML file needs a root node, which you can give any name you want. And you create that by declaring something as an XML node and then appending it to the XML document. So the first step was, well, we're creating an XML file. Let's create an XML document. And then we're going to use this with everything else that we use to create. So we call the append child method on the XML document, and we create a new element, which we're calling league. And that adds that first root node to the XML file. And then we can use this to start appending the rest of our data. So as the next line here says, you can start adding your children to the root node. So again, we create another XML node. And this time we use the root parent from here, and we call append child on that, and we create the team element. The next line of code is doing the attribute setting. And this is actually putting the value name and setting its value, or the attribute which is called name, and setting its value to seagulls. And that's an attribute of team because we're calling it right here, team. So we're keeping a reference as we go down through here so we can set everything appropriately. When you're adding children to the team, in this case the players for the team, you do the same sort of thing. We're creating a new XML node, and it's appending children to the team. And we give it a name we want, and then additional attributes are set for the player that was just added. So step by step, working your way down. You can go down, an infinite number of levels in this particular structure if you want. And of course, if you have a specific structure that you are trying to model, you can, simplify some of this by creating your own methods that you would call to add the stuff that would have some of this hidden, so you don't have to call these specific commands everywhere in your code necessarily. So this is adding two players here, Bob and Tom, and they were added to the seagulls. And then the rest of the code that's here just adds two more teams and adds two players to the teams. So the pigeons get Bill and Tim, and the crows get Ben and Ty. And that creates the XML file. Well, not the one we saw earlier. We'll run it to recreate that. And then you can save the XML. And saving it, there's an actual save XML method that you can use to save the XML, which is pretty handy. You just have to call save XML and give it the folder item of the file that you want to save it to. And you get a file on disk. So let's run that. And of course, fix any mistakes that I make when I'm editing code. Oh, that's not even the method we're in yet, so I'm just going to comment that out. All right, so we're in here. All right, so here is the XML file that was created. Notice it's not formatted in any way. It's all just essentially one big long line, which you can, I can split up here in this editor so that I can read it a little better. There, if you want it formatted, I'll show you some code that's in the language reference that uses a transform to do the formatting. But that's where you can see see what it's like to get the overall structure. Each of the teams is listed at a higher level if I put the returns in the right place, and then the players are underneath them. And you can design an XML structure that fits whatever your application needs. It can be any level of hierarchies. You can store the values however you want. So it's very, very flexible. And it's a pretty universal format in that a lot of things can read it. And also being text-based, you can also edit it outside your application, which can be handy from time to time as well. So you're going to see XML around a lot. So it's pretty handy. It can often be a good choice for your file formats. Let's All right, now I want to show a couple other XML examples here. Let's see, it's this one. Now this example project that comes with Xojo will actually let you pick an XML file and will show you its structure, so you can kind of click through it. So you can see here, this is it's kind of pre-built to include the XML that we just generated. But you can see it's showing you the root node and then all the children that are underneath it. And as you click to expand, you can see what's in there. So it can be a nice way to view specific XML structure better than a text file in some ways. But of course, if you're working with XML a lot, you're going to want to use an actual text editor that kind of does the auto formatting for you and whatnot. The one I was just using now, I think that's the Xcode editor that came up by default. I imagine Text Wrangler has some formatting as well. One thing I often use to look at XML files is, funnily enough, Firefox has a really good XML previewer built in. So you can just open the XML file in Firefox and you get a nice tree view of it. And it also does some pretty good validation to make sure the XML file doesn't have any errors in it, which is an important thing to bring up because, you know, looking at this XML file again, the structure is very important. You know, this node here starts with team and it ends with team, \team. If this ends with the wrong name, the XML file is going to be invalid and it won't load. If you forget closing tags, XML file will be invalid and it won't load. Now, if you're creating this yourself in code, it's not generally a problem. But if you do monkey around and start editing it or something like that, you could easily monkey up the XML file so that it won't load anymore. So that's something to keep in mind. Xojo also includes one other thing for dealing with XML files, and that is the XML reader class. This is a very advanced class, and most of the time you're not going to want to play with it. You're just going to want to use the XML document class and its related methods, which you can see if I just go back here and open up the methods to this. You can see this is doing the same sort of thing. It's creating an XML document and it's calling load XML on the file that was selected. And of course, it's wrapped in a try catch because if the XML is invalid for any reason, it's going to raise an exception, and you want to catch that so that your app doesn't terminate unexpectedly. This particular code just then initially loads the root node into the list box, and then when you expand things, it loads more children. And it checks through any attributes, checks through the children, and then loops through and loads them up. Now, this is all well and good, and it's a great way to process an XML file. But if the XML file gets gargantuan, really, really large, this can get pretty slow and can use a lot of memory because the entire XML file is loaded in memory right up front all at once. So the way around that, if you have that requirement, is to use the XML reader class. Now, like I mentioned, it's a pretty advanced class. And normally you're going to want to probably stay pretty far away from it. But essentially what it does is it gives you an event for each part of the XML that you then have to write your own code to process out the pieces of the XML you want. So it doesn't really do anything for you. It's a nice little thing that lets you write all kinds of code. You start by calling the parse method on the XML. So that's what this is doing right here. And we have, again, our sample XML, which is starting to look familiar. And then there's all kinds of event handlers. Right now, This one is just using a single one, which is called at the start of each XML as each XML element is read. And you can check the name of the element, and then you can fetch out specific pieces of information. So if I run this, you can see this reader is able to extract out the pieces of the XML that it needs. But it's all done completely by hand. And this can get really, really hairy and complicated if your XML file is incredibly complicated. You're going to have lots and lots of methods on there. As you can see, there's quite a few here. They all are called depending on the part of the XML that's being processed. A fair amount of them you might be able to ignore if your XML structure is not using all the advanced features of XML. And in many cases, in order to figure out the parts you need, you may need to just add a bunch of events, put a bunch of breakpoints in them or break commands, and then see what's getting called for the XML so you can parse it correctly. It's not likely you would ever really need this for your own file formats, but if you're trying to read an external file format that's very large, for example, say the iTunes database XML file that maintains, the list of all the music that's in your library, those files can get pretty large. And if you just need to read and process that, it can be a lot faster to go through the effort of coding up an XML reader to extract out exactly what you're looking for, rather than loading it into an XML document and attempting to process it in that way. All right, let's move on from XML to JSON. Now, JSON is a file format, or even a data transfer format. It stands for JavaScript object notation, I believe. And it's a kind of a compressed version of, well, not really compressed of XML, but it's roughly equivalent to XML, but it's more compressed. You'll notice XML was very wordy with all those tags and the tag names and the excessive nesting and everything. It can start to add a lot of overhead, particularly for networking when you're sending stuff back and forth. So JSON was created to be something a little more lightweight. So let's just run this so you can see an example of what JSON might look like. So you can see here a lot of use of this bracket, huh? I don't like brackets. I find them hard to read, but it is obviously more compact. So you can see here, this is the same structure that we looked at before with the same 3 teams and the same 2 players on each team, but this is in JSON format. So it's a little more compact. You'll often see JSON with if you're accessing web services. A lot of them tend to use JSON. A lot will have both available, JSON or XML, but JSON's pretty common there. But JSON also happens to make a pretty great file format, and it's a bit easier to use than XML. So this is the code that creates that particular file format. And in Xojo, there's just a single class you really have to worry about called JSON item. And it just uses a few methods to assign things. So it can be a lot simpler to work with than XML, which can get befuddling very quickly. So here we created a new JSON item. And well, actually, this isn't a new one. This is just a global one. We're gonna reuse this one for each player as we create it. And then we're creating another JSON item that's going to contain all the players. And then we create a player, and we set its value to something, and we add it to the player's JSON item that we created. So this created a player here, and it said, all right, that player is Bob. Assign his position property to Bob. Same thing's done for Tom. And now we can create a team, and we can add the players that were created here to the team, and we just have a player's ID for that. And it's kind of, so you can kind of think of it in reverse order. It's going from bottom to top. We created a player, we added it to the players list, we added that to the team, and now we're adding the team to the overall league. So we've created here a league, and we've added, we can add the team that was previously created, give it a name, and add it to the league. So it's kind of a reverse order, bottom to top, of adding the stuff to the JSON item. But the code is a lot shorter. This is all the code for adding all the players. And it's pretty much repeated. Realistically, you would probably, have this all extracted out into a method that you were reusing in your project, so that you weren't, duplicating code like this. Is obviously a bad idea. But repetition is showing you the example over and over, so you can see how that is operating. And then you can just call the toString method on the top level of the JSON item to get the string output of the JSON that you can then use however you want. And there's no specific save method here. So this is, right now I'm just writing it to a text area. But if you wanted to save it to an actual file, you would go back and use one of the streams, more than likely the text output stream, to write this particular text string that you have of the JSON data out to a file on your disk. Let's see here. Joel is asking if the create team JSON and create team XML files are in the Xojo examples. No, the actual projects are not in the Xojo examples. I'll make sure they're available with this webinar. The code that you're looking at actually primarily comes from the user guide in the framework section on the XML and JSON sections. But I will get also working examples that you can play with as well, attached when this webinar is uploaded. So you can see that's how that works. So it's a bit simpler than XML, and you might say it's even a little bit more modern than XML because it is newer. So certainly if you've never considered JSON before, you might want to take a look at it. But one other cool thing that JSON can do is you can create JSON from a dictionary. So if you're already using dictionaries in your apps, and why wouldn't you be? Because they are a great data storage mechanism. They're very fast and easy to use. You can see here, this is a simple dictionary that is has 3 values in it: an ID with this value, a name with this value, a city with this value. And you can just assign it to a JSON item. And that does the conversion to convert it to JSON, which you can then use however you want. And you can see we got the JSON here. So that can make it even easier to work with JSON, because you may already be using dictionaries for internal storage. And if it turns out you need to persist that in some way, you can just create a JSON item, assign the dictionary to it, and then boom, you have an easy way to get a text representation of the dictionary that you can then save, you can transmit across the internet, or do with whatever you want. So very handy. In an earlier webinar on, I think I made a text editor towards the end of last year, I used a dictionary to save the preferences, and I used JSON's ability to convert that as a way to save the preferences file. So if you want to see a specific example of that, go to the webinar archives and grab the creating a text editor. That was a 2-part webinar. I think part 2 we covered saving preferences. So JSON is definitely a great one to take a look at, and you may find that it's a lot easier for you to work with than XML. Cato is asking, why is the XML structure so different than the JSON structure? And yeah, that's a kind of a slight frustration, I suppose. But in general, XML is just more complicated than JSON. And our class structure that you see in Xojo is a complete mapping of the XML document object model, which has a lot of stuff. And most of the time, people don't need all the stuff that XML can do. But we're completely mapping to essentially the full XML spec there. So it does make it a little bit more complicated. Whereas the JSON item stuff is just a lot simpler, and we took the ability to make something that was a little easier to work with. We are considering some ways that we might be able to simplify XML creation and processing in the new framework that we're working on, and hopefully we can have something in there that makes it a little easier for you to approach. Certainly at first glance, when you look at the XML stuff, it's a bit daunting. All right, just checking my list here. All right, the next example I want to run through here is virtual volume. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of or even used the Xojo virtual volume class, but this is a class in Xojo that lets you create a file that can act as a container for other files. Now, you can almost think of it like a zip file, if you will, but without the compression. It's been around for a really long time. And it can be somewhat handy because sometimes you may have the need to have a file format that consists of multiple files. Now that's rare. I can't say that I personally have had to do this in any apps that I've created, but sometimes I could see the need where you might have maybe you want to save an XML file in a virtual volume along with another XML file that's related but different. And you want to but you don't want the user to have to see multiple files being saved on the disk. So you yourself can put them in a virtual volume. The user will only see the virtual volume on disk, but you'll be able to access any number of files that you put in the virtual volume independently. Now, it doesn't work too differently than working with a file system in general. The big thing is you use the virtual volume class, and you create essentially a virtual volume file on the disk. And then you can use this just as you would any other folder item to start creating files on there and writing stuff to it. So this particular code here is creating a simple example, and it's just writing a single file to it, but it's writing a file called virtualfile.txt, and it's going to put in that file whatever we happen to type into the edit area and saving that into the virtual volume. So if we run that here, you can see here that there's now a virtual volume file that is now on disk, but the text file itself is not visible. And the user can't expand this or see what's in it or anything like that. But they only have a single file to deal with, which might work for specific application designs. Now, if I want to get what is in there, this load code does that. And this essentially is doing pretty similar code to what you're already going to be familiar with when you're accessing folder items. It's getting a reference to the virtual volume itself, but it's opening it as a virtual volume. And then it's able to use that new reference to get at the individual files that are in there. And once it has an access to a virtual file, which is essentially a folder item, as you can see, it's declared right here as a folder item, you can use it just as you would any other folder item. And here we're using the text input stream to read the data that's in the text file and outputting it to the text area. Now, there could be multiple of these text files in that virtual volume. There's no limit. So if you turns out you have a need for that sort of thing where you want to have a file that actually consists of a bunch of files and you don't want to have the user be exposed to all the individual ones, you might want to consider how a virtual volume might help with that. Now, two other things I want to talk about. I don't have specific example projects on, but I just want to talk about them at a high level. One is the use of SQLite databases as a file format. I think someone might have asked me a question about that earlier. Yeah, Glenn had asked me, let's see here, for small sets of data, would using XML be preferable to SQLite? And in general, I don't know that the data size matters as much as how you intend to use the file. If you use something like a SQLite file as your file format, it becomes a little bit more opaque to the user. They can't easily see what's in the file unless they know, one, that it's a SQLite database, and two, they have some sort of database tool that allows them to open it and then see what's in it. So now that may be a plus or a minus depending again on the design of your app. You may not want the user to be able to go into your files that they save and monkey around with them and possibly break them. So that is a advantage to SQLite. Certainly, if you do have large amounts of data, SQLite will be way faster. It's a database after all. It'll do better memory management. It'll be faster to look things up. It would just be the way to go if you really are working with large files. But if you're not working with large files, XML is going to be pretty speedy. SQLite will also be speedy. Might incur a little bit more work on your part, having to write SQL statements or whatnot if your format is very simple. So it's not like you can just say, all right, pick one or pick the other. You got to think about what your use case is and what your app needs. Another nice thing you can do with SQLite is you can actually turn on encryption for it so that you could prevent anyone from seeing what's in it, no matter what. Again, might be a benefit depending on your application. But there are downsides to SQLite. Multiple files are created on disk when the SQLite database is being written to. That can cause permission problems. Might be a little weird for the user to see while they're using your app, that all of a sudden a few companion temporary files will appear right next to the SQLite file, and they might delete them because they think they don't belong, which could cause all kinds of problems. So things like that you might want to keep in mind. But in general, it can be a very good solution. I personally have used SQLite as data file formats. I found it works great. And it's particularly great if your file isn't actually exposed to the user. So if you have an app where all the data for the app is stored in, say, application support and isn't a file that the user specifically saves to documents or something like that, then it's pretty well hidden from the user. And some of the negatives I mentioned don't really apply. So I like using it in that case. So certainly keep that in mind. And then the other thing I wanted to mention that Xojo does not have direct support for at the moment, but zip files are also starting to be used as file formats. I think some of the newer versions of maybe Pages or Numbers have a zip file format, maybe even Words. One of Word's file formats might be zip based. The Xojo does not have a built-in zip class or anything like that, but most of the platforms do provide a shell command that can do zipping. So it's possible that you may want to consider using a zip as your file format. I do believe there are a couple third-party products available that let you handle zipping of files within Xojo. So that could be an option as well. The benefit of zip is, of course, that it's compressed. So depending on what's in your file, it could be reduced in size quite a bit. It also allows you to contain multiple things in it, like with a virtual volume. So that is nice. But the downside is that you may need to expand it to access the individual stuff, unless you have a specific third-party class that lets you get at the individual things within it without having to go through a full expansion. But something else to just put on your list to think about and see if that is a possible option for the app you are designing. Let's see here. Jim is asking if the virtual volume ever gets mounted to the Finder, or is it just a file volume? Yeah, it does not get mounted to the Finder. It's you can think of it as a Xojo-specific file format. So the Finder knows nothing about it. It just sees it as any other type of file. It can't see what's in it. The only thing that can see what is in it is a Xojo app that opens it up in this manner that you see here. which is kind of nice because that means, it looks just like a regular binary file to the operating system. You can transfer it around easily enough. You don't have to worry about losing parts of it. So it does have those benefits. But like I said, it's been in Xojo for many, many years. It's probably not very widely used, and it's probably not as quick as some other mechanisms. If you have tons and tons of files in there, it's not going to run as quickly as files that are actually on the file system. But in specific cases, it can be a great option. All right, there was a question at the beginning from Joel about file types. And I'm not really going to be talking too much about file types at the moment. Unfortunately, Xojo does not have great support for file types in here. And the best I can point you to for file type stuff, at least on the OS X side, is to refer to what is in the development user guide. And somewhere in this section, yes, here it is, the uniform type identifier section talks you through the specific steps you have to do to set up file types to work with a Xojo app on OS X. And it's kind of a pain at the moment. You are going to have to set things up specifically in the file type set editor, and then you are going to have to edit the info plist and make some changes. And yeah, I apologize, it is a pain. It's on our list that we need to greatly simplify this, just because this is not really, this isn't a solution at all, really. We're just forcing everybody to do it manually. But it does work for the time being. And so certainly read through these steps, and that should allow you to set up your own file types so that they work with your applications on OS X. And I do apologize for the tedious steps, and hopefully in an upcoming version of Xojo, this will have a nice, easy editor that you can just set all this stuff in and not have to worry about. All right, I'm just checking the questions over here. Well, I got a question from Cato, but I don't think I understand it. It just says open dialog and virtual volume. So I need a little more clarification there to be able to answer that. And Daniel is asking if there's any support for reading JSON formatted files. And yeah, actually, I didn't really show that, but let's open up the JSON item help page here. And where is it? The load method is right on there. And this can load the JSON as a string. So, like it doesn't have a corresponding save directly to disk method, you can use a text input stream to, grab the JSON. And then you can use the load method to load it up into a JSON item object so that you can then manipulate it, change things, do what you need to do. So yeah, that's how you'd work with that. So JSON item definitely you're going to want to use the text streams along with it. And certainly if you work with enough, you could create your own custom class that combines the two together and does all kinds of fancy things so that you don't have to worry about some of the specifics. But yeah, that'll work. All right. Is it possible, here's Cato's question, is it possible for the user to browse the files in the virtual volume using the open dialog window? And that's the standard ones you get with the get open dialog method calls or whatnot. No, you can't access it using those dialogs. You would have to create your own dialog essentially that loops through and pulls the names out individually and displays them in a list and lets the user see them. they won't work with the built-in operating system ones, again, because the operating system doesn't know anything about a virtual volume or what's in it. But you can certainly write your own browser pretty easily to do that. All right, going back to the documentation, I do want to, if you go to the language reference, there is theme areas at the top here, and there is a files area that you can click on to see a lot of specific stuff related to files. I didn't cover everything that's in here. Certainly special folders might be worth a mention. If you're saving stuff on file systems, special folders give you access to specific areas of the file system, so you don't have to hard code paths. Very handy to take advantage of. Application data is a very good one that's used for storing preferences and other sort of application-specific data that you don't want the user to easily be able to see and change and do all that stuff with. That's a pretty common one that's used. Also, there's desktop and documents and stuff like that. So special folder is a great one, and there is a little note at the bottom here. On Xojo Cloud, special folder is greatly limited and only really points to a few locations. That makes sense. And of course, the underlying thing I didn't specifically talk about here, but it's kind of the assumption. When you're dealing with files, obviously you're dealing with folder items in Xojo. And this is what you use to get a reference to a file that's on disk somewhere. And there's lots and lots of methods and properties on here. In the examples, there are different ways that you could create folder items. You can, prompt the user to select something using one of the dialogues. You can specifically refer to a file using its path. You can find it using a variety of calls to child, stuff like that. And of course, you can manipulate folder items. You can delete them. You can change permissions on them. Variety of things. But this is your access into the file system. But once you have access to a specific file, all the other things I showed you today are how you would actually create or load those files. All right, let me just scan the questions here real quick. All right, I don't see any outstanding questions. I want to remind people that next week's webinar is covering dynamic controls, which is primarily going to be using control sets and container controls. Some of that will be a little bit of a repeat of what we talked about last year with container controls, but they're an important topic and worth a little bit of review. And I also want to remind everyone to take advantage of our forum and ask questions, help other people by answering questions, but certainly check it out. It's a very busy, vibrant area with lots of discussion about Xojo. This recording will be, the recording of this webinar will be made available this week. Usually takes me a couple days to get it all processed and uploaded to YouTube, so certainly stay tuned to that. And if you want to be notified, of course, you can go to the YouTube site. And there's a somewhere on here a subscribe button you can click in once you're I need to upgrade Flash now. The sign in, and then you can subscribe to things so you get notifications when new items are uploaded. So that looks like everything for today. So I want to thank everyone for attending this week's webinar, and have a great rest of your day.